Hello and welcome to our webinar, How Australia's Mates in Construction Opens Doors to Suicide Prevention. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Canadian Mental Health Association BC Division's office is located on the unceded traditional and ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I'd also like to thank the Mental Health Commission of Canada for co-hosting this event with us and for sponsoring our speaker we're going to hear from today. Before we launch into the content, I'll just point out a few features of the technology. First of all, there are two options for sound. You can use your computer's audio or dial in by telephone. Second, we will be recording today's session and posting the video online on our website at cmha.bc.ca alongside a PDF copy of the slides. And you can find that file in the handout section on the panel to your right. After the presentation, there may be questions, and we hope that you do have questions. Please type them into the questions section on the panel to the right again. Thank you again, and I'm briefly going to introduce our first, our moderator, Dammy Albach. Dammy is was the manager of our suicide prevention gatekeeper training here at CMHA BC and is currently leading up our Confident Parents Thriving Kids program. She is a specialist in suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention issues, and is the most recent past president of the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention. Take it away, Dammy.
Thank you very much. And I'm lucky enough to get to introduce Jorgen. Jorgen from Mates in Construction in Australia. He's the CEO there, and we have an hour with him. He's the founder of a groundbreaking charity owned by the Australian building and construction industry, and they have managed over the past 10 plus years to actively engage and train 162,057 mostly male construction workers, and note, mostly male construction workers, to reach out and connect with their co-workers, their mates, who might be thinking about suicide, and provide them with support and assistance and linkage to resources. This program is turning lives around. It's breaking down stigma. It's bringing together workers, unions, and employers. It's winning minds and hearts in support of suicide prevention, to the extent that on World Suicide Prevention Day, great big Mates in Construction flags are flown on work sites all over Australia. And there's a slide, the second one in, I think, that shows a number of gentlemen who, no, you can go back one, a number of gentlemen who are actually showing those flags on a construction site. There are actually, and Jorgen will talk more about that, there are construction sites all over Australia who are looking to be accredited to become safe, suicide-safe sites, and actually fly that flag. So it has moved from becoming a stigmatized issue to being, I would say, a little bit of a status symbol, to be flying this flag on your building site, which I think is absolutely amazing. So I'm not going to say any more because there's a whole bunch of questions that I'd like to ask Jorgen so he can share some of his knowledge with you. And the first question is, could you give us, I guess, really a fast and dirty overview of why and how Mates in Construction was developed?
Mates in Construction was started because we had to. We just had to. We were working in the industry. I was a union official and several other union officials within the industry. And we just lost too many people. We simply just lost too many people. I suppose the real driver for it came from our pension fund and from our severance fund, that we just realized that, of course, when you have large numbers of workers, there's a natural number of people who would die each year. But consistently, when we looked at it, we worked out that of those workers, more than 1 in 5 of the people who died actually died by their own hands. And with it being that prevalent, when you worked in the industry, you just could not avoid being exposed to it. You could not avoid having to cope with the fact of workers on site losing a workmate by their own hands. So with that in mind, we set out firstly to work out whether what we saw in our industry was actually normal. is that what it should be like? Because when you are a plumber or carpenter or whatever we do in the industry, that's not normally what we do, suicide statistics. So we really needed to have a good look at whether what we experienced was what we should experience. Now, even if we had been average, I thought the calamities we saw was bad enough to act. But what we did very early in the piece, we engaged with the university to get some research done. And if we go to the next slide, perhaps we can just share some of the findings we had from that research. Can we go to the next slide? So we engaged with the Australian Institute of Suicide Research and Prevention to look at the Queensland building construction industry to find out whether suicide rates were normal or not. And what we were told was that the suicide rates were significantly increased for workers generally, more than 46% higher than was for other men in Australia. But what was really quite shocking was that it was the young workers, it was the apprentices, which was the highest risk. Because as a tradesman, you do pride yourself in that our role is actually to look after the apprentices, to bring them up and bring them into the industry. And I think that when we looked at that, we were probably failing to some extent. So that was quite an eye-opener. We also worked out that from that research that people who died by suicide was a lot more likely to have consumed alcohol at the time of death than other people were in Australia. We were much more likely to have a relationship breakup, particularly the young workers. When we looked at the young workers, 175% more likely to have a relationship breakup as a trigger event. So it told us it was very basic resilience issues that was missing, and perhaps how we dealt with some of those things that needed to change. And the last bit, of course, was that the workers within the industry was a lot less likely to have sought any sort of professional help. So that was sort of the data we got. We also asked the university to find out why. Being union officials, we thought, tell us what's wrong and we'll ban it and we'll fix it. But the type of things that came out of it was not the kind of things you can ban, fix that easily. If we go to the next slide, perhaps. The type of issues that was the typical issues that was the trigger events were fairly ordinary stock standard life events. The type of things that we all go through, whether you're a construction worker or not. We also did some focus groups with the industry to find out what it was that people saw as the major stressors in the industry. And a lot of those were quite structural. So they weren't the issues that were that easy to fix. So we really said, well, how do we actually work around that? And a lot of the thinking behind the program was, how do we actually do work around the existing culture within the industry? Rather than starting by thinking about what is the best suicide prevention or the best mental health program we can do, is we actually said, what are going to be the barriers in this industry to do good work, and let's look at them first. And the very specific, I suppose, instructions from the industry was, go out and find the industry structures and the industry communication channels and use them for the program. Because we reckon that it's going to be hard enough to get men to talk about mental health and suicide prevention. So we also have to get them used to a whole new structure, a whole new way of engaging. They're going to run 100 miles. But if we align it with something that we already know as an industry, we're much more likely to accept it.
So meeting people really where they're at, rather than deciding somewhere else that this is what we should do.
I think that as opposed to really and perhaps even if we go to the next slide, the starting point really for an intervention, any intervention might be, and I don't think we do that well as a mental health or suicide prevention sector at all. But really, I think the starting point on any intervention is a line of sight from the end consumer. So from the construction worker on this side, what's the line of sight to where we want them to go? Where is the line of sight to help, to support, to better lives? And until we understand that, we really shouldn't start designing programs. So when we consider that in the construction industry, if you look at the slide we just put up, the yellow hat there represent the construction worker. And we have a lot of help available in the construction industry. We have some really, really good structures, but we don't get to them. We are really, really poor at getting to them. And I suppose one of the very early bits of advice we got as we started engaging and trying to look at what the program should look like, and we talked to mental health and suicide prevention experts. They said the fundamental problem is that men don't seek help.
Yes, we hear that all the time.
And that we need to get men to seek help. And we have to find more effective ways to get men to seek help. And being a practical guy, we started talking. I said, well, if men don't seek help, why do you keep asking us? Like it is almost a definition of insanity to keep doing the same thing and expecting that we get a different answer. So we actually had to find a way where we could turn that down and not do what we are so bad at. Actually try to find out what is it that we're really good at and see whether we can co-opt that trait in the name of suicide prevention and mental health. So having thought about it a fair bit and looking at it, some of the things that sort of came out is that men, we're really put on this earth to fix broken things. You know, if the door binds and the drawer doesn't, like, I'm going to try to fix it even if I'm hopeless at it. But, you know, that's quite important to me to do that because that's just why I'm here. I have 4 kids. I have 3 older kids and I have a daughter that is 9 years old. And that's my wife's first child. So I've been through this sort of cave up before and she's still doing a lot of firsts. So I come home from work and she started telling me about the difficulties that Yetta have at school and about how there's some kids that's, you know, teasing her and how she finds it difficult to talk to the teachers about it. And I got about 5 or 10 minutes worth of patience for that. And then I tell her exactly how to fix it. And you need to go and see the teachers, you know, and she's never ever grateful. She's always, but to me, this conversation makes no sense if we're not trying to fix it. So we thought perhaps it might actually be better to speak into men's need to fix broken things. And also perhaps start explaining to us why it's so difficult for us to seek help. Because if our primary focus in life is to fix broken things, when you come to the point where you realize your life is broken and you can't fix it, it really starts affecting how you feel as a man. And that's a very hard thing to actually recognize.
Or to tell to somebody else.
Tell to somebody else. Yeah, absolutely. So we turned it around and said, this is actually all about help offering. We're not going to use the F word on sites. We're not going to talk about feelings. We're going to talk about helping your mate. We're going to talk about what does it look like when somebody is struggling, and how do you reach a hand out to somebody who's struggling, because we do that all the time. And that's really the core of the whole show in a very practical sense. Coming with mental health and suicide prevention as a fixable problem that is within our purview to fix. Now, that also made it clear how we speak about it. So we don't really speak about it in a mental health term. We don't really speak about it within a mental illness paradigm. We talk about it in terms of having a hard time or going through a difficult time or whatever, because as soon as we talk about mental illness or mental health even, because often, although it's wrong, we sort of put the two things aside and next to each other, it's about them. It's about those other people and it's not about me. Whereas very few of us, if any, go through life without getting a few knocks. So it's a lot easier to actually identify with having a hard time. And of course, you can have a hard time because you've got a mental illness. You can have a hard time because you've got a drug and alcohol problem. You can have a hard time because you lost your job or because your relationship is breaking down.
So in a way, if we use the mental health language, you're actually taking work that's been done and making it culturally appropriate.
Yes, I just didn't know that. Yeah.
What would you say, Jorgen, have been your major accomplishments to date with the program?
I think the major accomplishment is probably that we have taken something that has been very much expert-driven in the minds of ordinary workers,
Yeah.
and turned it into something that we all have a duty to deal with, and we all have to do, and it becomes almost part of the done thing. That we stand up for the people who are vulnerable on our sides, and that we support each other, and that's really the whole foundation of the program, is look out for your mate. And part of the stuff that we can see is that, for instance, you talked about the flags at the start of it. Once a year, we ask the volunteers, which is ordinary construction workers who are what we call, I might, if you don't mind, just go really quickly the 3 levels of the program.
Sure.
And then, because then it makes a little bit more sense what I'm going to say. So we go to the next slide. The way we engage with workers on site is we simply go to the site. We don't go through the company. So we don't go through HR or the company. We go directly to the site and engage with the project manager on that site and get permission to run the program on that site. And because it's free of charge, so there's no purchase order that has to be put off the line or anything like that, it's a local decision. And what they commit to is an hour's worth of lost productivity, where we get all the workers in the site together, and we talk about suicide as a problem we face in our industry, and mental health issues as a problem we face in our industry, and what we can do about it. So we talk about it's an issue that touches us all, but it's actually an issue that is preventable, because suicide is largely preventable. And that's what it looks like when one of your mates is struggling. And this is what you should do about it. You should either connect them up to help, or you should offer to help them. That, as I said, takes about an hour. And when people get that, they get a white stick on there, put the white stick on the hard hat. And that means they can look around site and they can see everybody in this site is actually on board with this message. And that's quite important for site culture.
I love that.
Yeah. We use a feedback card, and it's sort of a, it's really just an excuse to get a piece of paper back. And we ask some research questions that we can then evaluate, but we get the names. But at the back of the card, we ask 2 questions. One of them is, do you want contact from the field officer? And the other one is, do you want to be a volunteer with the Mates in Construction program? So that way we can sit down all together and fill this out, and quite anonymously ask for help without anyone actually knowing. We collect those cards at the end when we change them over with sticker. And we find that between 2 or 3% of the people who attend the training
actually are looking for help.
Some of them very way upstream, and they're just checking that the system works. And others write down that I've actually made my decision, and this was just the last roll of the dice of trying to make sure that things are okay. We get somewhere between 20 and 30% who participate in the training who volunteers to become connectors. And now when they volunteer with the charity Mates in Construction. They don't volunteer in their capacity as employees of the employer. And that means that they are volunteers with an industry charity, and they take that role with them when they change site. Because workers move through the industry all the time, from site to site, from different places. So you sort of have that organic collectiveness within it.
And the capacity to kind of virally spread the program.
Absolutely. And that's been a way of actually one of the biggest problems with getting to workers was that they thought, well, there's very little connection between us and the employer because we change employers all the time. Whereas actually about how do we turn that around to use that to our advantage? What is one of those industry structures we can actually use for our benefit? So we go to the next slide. We go back on site, and we train between 20 and 30% of the people become volunteers and become connectors. We then go back to the project manager and talk about getting about 1 in 20, or about 5% of the workforce released to be connectors. And that's a 4-hour on-site training course we run. We deliver living work safe talk in that session, but contextualized into construction. So
you bracket it.
We bracket it. We put construction front and back, but we deliver stock standard safe talk in the middle. So we talk about what's your role as a connector. How do we need you to help us spread the program? How should you interact with other connectors on your site? How can you advise your employer about mental health issues when it comes to what you see as a connector. How do you connect people up to help? Really, really importantly, how do you do self-care? How do you actually make sure you stay safe?
So important.
And how do you debrief and how do you get support for your role? And how can you actually, as a group of connectors on this side, be connectors for each other? Because, of course, any one of us could have a hard day as well.
Yes.
So how do we actually build that in to build safety into that program? Now, they also get a sticker. That's a green sticker. And that means that when we do the white sticker training, we say all you have to do is find a person with a green sticker and they know what to do next. And we make sure that those connectors are actually throughout the workplace, so that we have an apprentice connector and we have a tradesman connector. We have a male connector and a female connector. We have a manager who's a connector. We have a laborer who's a connector. Because, of course, if the manager comes into work one morning, he's not very likely to go, he or she is not very likely to go to the apprentice and say, my marriage is breaking up. And similar, the apprentice is not very likely to go to the project manager and say, I can't handle my drugs and drinks. So it's important that we have somebody we all feel comfortable going to, somebody who's just like ourselves. And those connectors can then start the conversation and connect them up to help. So by doing that, if you can see sort of on the slide, we start filling in that gap between the worker who's struggling and the services out there. And it's really about building a bridge between people and the services. It's also important that it fits the structures. We have safety committees on site, and safety committees are quite important because construction works is such a dynamic workplace that things changes all the time. So we need lots of eyes and ears out to make sure that handrails are not missing or holes in the ground is not uncovered and all those kind of things. So as a workforce, we're used to say when the handrails are missing, I just find somebody from the safety committee and then make sure the scaffolder come and fix it and whatever as soon as practical. We're really just doing the same thing. When I see one of
something that already
exists. So, when I see something, I'm already aware that I can go to a peer and they'll get fixed for me, and that's really all we do with that. And also, when you have the safety committee stick on the hard hat and somebody is grinding the floor without, a mask on, it's quite all right. It's socially permissible for you to go and say, put your mask on. That's your role. Therefore, when you've got the green connector stick on, it's quite socially accepted. Dammy, you look out of thoughts. Is everything okay? That's equally all right. So that's the sort of thing that we use the existing culture. And the last bit we do to run the program out is key workers on site, the key helpers, and that's the next slide. We train them in assist. That we compare to first aid. So we have people who are first aid trained on site, they have a stick on the hard hat. Assist people have a stick on the hard hat. If I'm on site and I have a heart attack, I trust the builder laborer to give me CPR. He knows not to give me open heart surgery or anything like that. Yeah, I hope so. But if I don't get that CPR, I probably wouldn't make it. Yes. And we have to realize that for mental health crisis, it's sometimes the same. The people who don't get that help here now won't actually make it.
That first aid model is very appropriate to suicide prevention.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's skills. It's basic skills you learn. It's ABC, just like you do for physical first aid.
Well, and the other thing you've done, you've really taken an appreciative approach. You've looked in your system and figured out what works in other contexts and said, how do we make this work for us and how do we get more of it?
Yeah, absolutely. As I started by saying, that is actually the benefit, I think, of taking the time to look at the problem from the worker's point of view or from the end user's point of view. If we had come at this from a mental health expert's point of view, there would be a lot of these things we haven't seen.
Absolutely.
We just wouldn't have seen. And most often what we do with these programs, we sort of design them through the access structures as opposed to the use structures.
And from the top down.
From the top down. So if I'm getting into this workplace, I really need to talk to the employer because, and of course we have to have lots of respect because they, at the end of the day, pay people and employ them. But it's a particular line of sight and we might not actually see the full problem. So what we have then created on that side is a self-contained model where there's actually a direct line between the worker who's struggling and the support structures. And we then back that up by operating a 24/7 support line for workers and particularly the volunteers. And we provide case management. Yes. So we don't provide any clinical service at all, but when somebody is struggling, somebody will go down with them in Orange, whatever, just like them, sit down and say, what's going on for you at the moment? So you're going through a divorce. Okay, well, maybe we need to find some legal advice for you. Maybe we need to find some counseling. And maybe some of this is about you giving the alcohol a bit of a notch. And maybe we just need to have a look at that issue as well. And then we connect them up with those different services. And because we're not directly vested in the provision of it,
Yes.
that means that we can then check in with people and say, how do you go? I didn't like that counselor. Okay, but that didn't fix the problem, did it? Now, well, let's find somebody else. Or alternatively, if you thought counseling was going to be easy, it's probably not working for you.
Which means you're continuing to provide support as the person gets steady on their feet.
Absolutely, until they're back in the workforce, while they continue in the workforce. So that's the model. And so when we come back to that the flag we talked about before, what we're really doing is we're asking those connectors to be active. So we're saying one of the things we ask you to do is to be the connection point, but we also ask you to be advocates on the job. And once a year, we ask the connectors to organize on their side an event where they gather all the workers at lunchtime or after lunch, and they talk about a celebration of the work we're doing as an industry.
Awesome.
And we take a pledge that we want to look out for our mates. And we then celebrate, and we seal that with some sort of ritual. Some sites do that by everybody going up and signing the mates in construction flag. Other sites do it by raising the flag in the crane or putting it somewhere on the side. And they organize that all day. They do that entirely locally.
What marvelous stigma busting that is.
It is, because once we do something, we own it. So we started that about 4 years ago. And we just sent an email out to the connectors, and we had about 180 sites that registered. And that have grown. So last year we had over 1,000 sites that was doing that all on the same day, which means then, of course, as you walk through the city, you see flags everywhere off all the sites and off the scaffolds and all those kind of things. And what that does is that creates a movement that says that's what we do in my industry. And that means I own it, and I'm proud of it, and it means I'm more likely to do it.
Well, and we know so much with respect to suicide prevention that an awful lot of what really makes a difference is helping people move out of being isolated and alone and feeling like there's no one else like them who's going through these issues. And all of a sudden you've created a supportive, caring community of peers. It's amazing.
It's quite uplifting.
Yeah.
But again, it's not that hard. Actually, it's actually when you take the time. So, what does the industry look like? Things actually falls into place if we take the time to listen.
So successes. What would you? And I think we're hearing about an awful lot of them. You're seeing, but are you actually seeing changes that you would at least speculate are directly attributable to mates in construction?
Well, you can sort of define successes as 3 different levels. I've had the gift of going out to workers who were acutely suicidal when they were identified through the structure, and sitting down with them and working out that they weren't that sure, and that perhaps to give it another chance and keep going. And I've had the chance of meeting them, sending me the thumbs up across the side as I walked through and did some training. And at a personal level, that is incredible. That is an amazing meeting. There's a family that have a provider and all those kind of things because of that. So that's a level of success that if I just had that would actually tick the box. I think there's another level of success as well, and that is when people truly own the mission and start actually doing their own things with it. And we've had some wonderful examples of workers just saying, what does that actually mean on our side? If we really want to be suicide safe and mental health, this major construction is all right, but I actually reckon we can take it one step further. So some of those stories about how people are building into the daily restarts, how they're building into the safety culture, how they have dealt with crisis on their website. And one of the sites that really come to mind for me was a very remote site. And I don't want to go into detail because I don't want to sort of identify exactly the build-up, but a very remote site, so remote in Australia that there was no mobile phone coverage. And they were doing a project that was sort of moving, so they had a camp that moved along with the project. And they were out there for 2 or 3 weeks at a time without really any ability to communicate with home. And on that project, they had a fatality. So one of the workers died. And because of the remoteness, it would take several days to get the employee assistance program or any of the sort of norm support out to them. Mm-hmm. So the connectors had a connector meeting, and they gathered and said, this is one of the things we talked about in the training could be a risk. How do we best deal with that? And they went back and they photocopied some mating construction symbols. And they then took turns to put those symbols up on their doors in their rooms in the camp. And said, whenever that symbol is on the door, you can knock, you can come in, and somebody want to listen on the other side. And they then found that workers didn't only come and talk about the fatality, but they also came to talk about the arguments they had with a partner on the way to the airport, the fact that they were missing their son's birthday, or all of those kind of other things that run in your mind as you sit out there far away from home. And so they kept that for the rest of the program. It was never mating construction. It was just what this actually looks like when we really care about these things at a local level.
And it's so wonderful to see something like that rise up from the grassroots. I mean, again, we could use fancy mental health language and call that postvention.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it was a human response that came out of bringing these folks together as a community and empowering them to respond to the people that they care about in their community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And people like it.
Yeah.
They want to be able to deal with things. They want to be able to fix things.
Yeah, coming back to that notion of this is what I need to do. I'm someone who doesn't want to be identified as a person who has challenges. I want to be a helper.
Yep, absolutely. So I think that's a level of success. We did some research back in 2013 where we interviewed 69 assist workers to find out what their experiences was with being an assist worker with mating construction. At the time, we had about 105 suicide interventions registered on our database. Those 69 assist workers identified 231 suicide interventions that they had done. Wow. Which told me that they had done it and they didn't need us. Yeah. Which I thought was absolutely amazing. I thought that's a real success. Actually, ultimately, we would define success as not being needed anymore. Yes. We would define success as saying mating construction is a way we do business. This industry is not a program we actually run. So that is a second line I would sort of define as success. And I think we've got a little bit of disorder on the slides. We might just jump 2 slides ahead. One more. And this is probably, if you're an academic and you like statistics.
And there's probably some of those on this.
You like this one. So what we've done is we do an annual report on suicide in the construction industry. So we monitor the suicide rates within the industry. And this is the trend in Queensland. So over the years, we have seen, unfortunately, the trend amongst men in Queensland for suicide have gone up in terms of standardized suicide rates. Mm-hmm. But suicide rates amongst construction workers have been falling. So we've actually narrowed the gap where we started from a particularly high level. Yeah. We started narrowing the gap. Now, we can't claim any sort of causal relationship with that. We just have to say that this is an observation, this is happening. Yeah. It's good enough for me. But that tells me that we're perhaps on the right track.
I've got a question for you. Certainly in Canada, and I would imagine this would be true in Australia as well, when we hear about what the blockages are to engaging in suicide prevention, one of the things we hear is, well, there just aren't enough resources. And that can stop almost any conversation dead in its tracks, quite frankly. People then don't go any further. They complain about all the ways where we don't have enough resources. Somehow you managed in Australia to move from people talking about what they couldn't do to what they could do.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how you managed that.
Well, I suppose we just didn't know we couldn't do it. So that's probably the easiest way to deal with it. No, we managed, like eating an elephant, small bites at a time. We never set out to change the culture in the industry. We never even set out to convince the industry we had a problem. We set out to convince a project manager. In the early days, there was a lot more project managers who didn't want to engage with us than who did. We walked through many, many closed doors. But project managers, like anyone else, are sometimes exposed to suicide, have sometimes lost to suicide, have sometimes had their own struggles. So when you bumped into those project managers, they would tend to open the doors. And as those project managers started opening the doors, what happens in an industry which is very much risk focused? If you think about construction, I like to say somebody want a building built. So they're client and they go to a number of builders and get proposals, and then they pick the cheapest one and the fastest one. And that project manager then goes out to a number of subcontractors and asks them to quote on that job. And when they get all those quotes, they pick the cheapest one and the fastest one. And those subcontractors, in order to actually manage that, really have to be quite snazzy about it, keeping the labor really tight. So people come and go all the time. So if you are a builder, what you really have to do is you have to make sure nothing goes wrong on the job. From the start to the end, if something goes wrong on the job with a tight schedule, tight price, you write the job off. So they're really, really focused on risk management at all different levels. So we had to find a way to buy into that culture. If we could be part of risk management, then sites will do it naturally. So to do that, we had a very defined program, and we did not shy away from it. We did not compromise. We did not negotiate. We said, if you want to run the program, you run the program. If you don't want to run the program, that's all right. But we don't do half a program. We don't do a quarter of a gap. We only do a full general awareness training and full so on. And patiently just going from site to site to site. Eventually what happens is initially people deny there's a problem because we don't really want to deal with the risk. More and more sites took it on board, and then as more and more sites took it on board, nobody could actually deny the risk was there. And given that most of those builders felt that they were much better at building buildings than doing suicide prevention, a way to managing this risk would actually be to engage with a program like Mates in Construction. So eventually, we actually became pulled in as a way that they could deal with the risk, as opposed to being a risk to them. And to help that along, one of the things we did was we established what we called accreditation. So when a site had trained every worker in general awareness training, they had a process in place to make sure that they maintained it at 80% or better. They had connectors trained, they had access to an assist resource. We would accredit the site. So we give them a certificate, and we give them a sign they could put on the front gate of the job, and we have a little ceremony on the job where we give them the certificate and so on. And that sort of becomes like an audit, because with the risk culture goes an audit culture. So it becomes a way that they could tick the box. So now we had a way of ticking the box. So what then happened was at the project site, we went and we did that. The builders then looked at that and said, well, actually, we got all these sites that get accredited. Maybe as a corporate safety policy, we put in that sites need to be accredited with Mates in Construction as a way of us as a builder dealing with the risk. So what is happening now is that those builders we have actually hardly really dealt with in any direct form is now writing that into their internal safety policies that they need to get Mates in Construction on site. The dynamic of that is we are now actually helping the project managers achieve what they need to achieve for their boss. And
which is really interesting because again, you come at it not from the point of view of we'll develop a policy and force people to follow it.
yes,
It's that this will come up from the bottom, and then a policy will be developed in support of something that our people are saying we need.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I want to say the only way this could be done was that we had a very generous startup.
I was not going to ask you, where did the money come from?
So we had the severance fund invested quite heavily in setting the program up. Our pension funds, most of the pension funds provide death insurance. So a number of the pension funds worked out, so if we can stop 1 or 2 deaths, we're actually going to be ahead. So they were quite. So the first thing was that we were it was fairly generous the way we were set up financially to start with. And the second bit was that quite often when we create mental health programs, to get the funding, we have to put up a really competitive bid, which means that to achieve that bid, you really have to hit and go out and produce really, really fast.
Yeah.
And in order to produce really, really fast, you have to make a whole heap of compromises to get there, because otherwise you won't get there because your funding is under risk and all that.
Yeah.
Because we were funded untied to produce this, we could focus on quality. We could say we're not going to do anything, and we didn't have to reach scale. So initially, we only offered the program within the CBD of Brisbane. 2 or 3 field officers just going around to a handful of sites, do 5, 10, 20, 30 sites, just what we could handle.
Like a pilot project.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And then just growing organically. So eventually then we put somebody on the Gold Coast, and there was another population centre. And after a few years, we then started expanding into regional Queensland. But we just did it. Because of the funding structure, we could do it organically, and we could do it when we were ready for it. And that's a luxury that most mental health programs don't have.
You're right.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that's part of the story.
Well, and I understand now that there are charity fundraisers that are happening all over Australia in support of mates in construction. So there again is a good deal of engagement in making sure the program continues financially. People are raising money to make it happen.
We get 80% of our funding from the industry, and through either businesses donating or becoming partners with us, but also through fundraising. So each year, over the suicide prevention week, we send a team of construction workers off to the jungle in Papua New Guinea, and they walk one of the historical tracks, 190 kilometers in mud to the ankles through the jungle with local trekkers, and then come back and discuss how long their toenails stayed on their feet and things like that you don't even want to go for. But they do a major fundraising effort for, so 20 to 30 people leave each year, and they are construction workers, they're union delegates, and they are CEOs from construction companies. And those people then from widely different areas of the industry get together and then get through a really tough experience together, which create networks that we can use when they come back for fundraising. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, I know that when I looked at your website, it said that there has been an 8% reduction in suicide in Queensland since it started.
Yep.
And that now you're talking about in the next 5 years, a further 15% reduction. And I'm wondering if there's anything you're going to be doing differently or more to make that happen. How are you going to get to that 15%?
There's 2 or 3 things we're doing at the moment. One of the things where Mates have placed itself is as an independent charity, which means that we have an immense respect for the unions and an immense respect for the employers within our industry. In Australia, union and employer relationships are quite acrimonious. There's lots of disputes and it's played pretty hard. So there's not much they work together on. But we have sort of been able to be that space in the middle that is reasonably neutral. So in 2016, we were able to pull the industry together, having the most senior leaders of the employer associations and the most senior leaders of the union movement together with the representatives of the 30 largest companies. And we spent a day together as a round table discussing what good mental health would look like for the construction industry. And one of the things you can rely on when you put a lot of testosterone into a room is that everybody want to be the best. So the industry decided that we wanted to be world leaders over the next 5 or 6 years. And we're only going to be world leaders if we really buy into it. So one of the things that we have developed is a blueprint or roadmap for better mental health and suicide prevention that the industry have signed on to. We have support from the master builders, we have support from the main unions, and we're then going to go out and ask individual employers to sign up to it. And then just, not in a sort of punitive way, or not in a prescriptive way, but just slowly but steadily focusing on actually start thinking about mental health and day-to-day business at a broader level than just suicide prevention and mental health. So that's one area we're really going to work on.
Can people in Canada get their hands on that blueprint?
Absolutely. There's a website called constructionblueprint.org.au, and it can be downloaded for free.
Perfect.
And this was only made public in December, so it's still a very new journey for us. We're going to put a case manager for employers on. Basically, just a case manager can go out with employers and see them, help them connect up with the existing resources, not just mates in construction, but every other resource that can help them with better mental health on their journey. So we become sort of a hub of good practice when it comes to the industry. So that is a really big thing we're going to work on. The other big thing is that we have been doing resilience for apprentices. So we've been doing what we call the life skills toolbox, where we have sort of been talking to apprentices about drug and alcohol, about financial management, relationships, and all. And we've been doing that for a number of years. And that was a program we took over from another organization. But it has never quite really connected. And we have not worked out why the industry have not taken it on. It hasn't had the same viral effect. So we decided to go back and say, what have we actually done that we don't feel matches our ethos? And what we realized when we looked at the program was that the program was designed the old way. It was designed with good mental health knowledge, talking to employers about what apprentices needed.
And not talking to the apprentices. Yeah.
So what we did was we then engaged with the university to do a number of focus groups. We did about 60 apprentices in 10 focus groups to really find out what are the issues they think they need, what is the life skills they feel they need in order to get better mental health. What came out of that was that there was a significant issue with bullying. There was virtually all the apprentices had experienced bullying, from extreme bullying, which was assault, to bullying that we might not consider bullying, but obviously bullying is defined by the receiver. So most of them had experienced bullying one kind. Most of them felt that the supervision they received was poor or below par. Most of them experienced anxiety when they went to a new site. And all of them felt completely powerless to do anything about it. Now, that have meant that we have terminated our Life Skills Toolbox program, because teaching resilience into that environment, in my view, is a bit like teaching breathing exercises to asbestos workers. We actually need to deal with it as source. We really need to deal with the industry source. So we have commissioned a bigger research project that is going to survey all the apprentices in the state and start stratify that across the industry to find out where the issues are worse. And we're then going to go through an industry consultation and design a bottom-up program again, trying to use our structures and perhaps do sort of a Me Too type approach, saying, what about if we try to empower the apprentices to speak up and try to put the duty on tradesmen to listen? And then we can start talking about resilience. So that is sort of the two big things. If we're gonna reduce suicide by 15%, they're probably the two issues we really need to get: employer culture and industry culture at a higher level, but also at a very deep level, look at the most marginalized and vulnerable groups within the industry.
And your apprentices, by and large, fall right into that young male category that you are so concerned about because of suicide.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. The latest research we did, we published, was talking about suicide rates was a significantly younger age profile within the industry. So it's by far the apprentices, which is our biggest risk group. we published a paper this year that looked at stigma and what do you call it, mental health literacy amongst young workers, and they found that they had less mental health literacy and more stigma than other workers. But it also found that apprentices were much more susceptible to mental health messages and produced much more movement when it came to actually receiving the mates and construction program. So we are putting seeds in fertile ground.
Now, I know that there are a number of people on the website who perhaps have questions that they want to put forward. And so I'm actually being handed a
Let's go.
that you are going to have to deal with.
This is where you lose control.
So, it says, first question is, have you thought about starting an international chapter? Let's not reinvent the wheel, especially when it's going so successfully.
That is a really good question. If I went and started an international chapter, I would come here as an expert and looking for how I get access to the industry, and then I would look at the workers in that industry last. So I don't think that this program is a program that lends itself to colonization. I think what is much more useful is that if people think that these ideas work, is that then the local community say, what would that actually mean for us? What is our line of sight? And then collaborate. I am absolutely with you. There is no need to reinvent the wheel. That's why we're using Living Works, for instance. We could probably have designed something that would be really smart and construction and all that, with lots of symbols and metaphors and all those kind of things in the training program. But something could already exist. Why redo it? So I think we should not reinvent the wheel, but we should also make sure that we don't get that either, that we actually repeat all mistakes.
Our next question is, have you seen a reduction of stigma around mental illness within the construction industry? Is it more accepted? Is it more understood?
Yes, I think a number of the pre and post questions we talk about show that there's a reduction. We in the mining industry, because we have there's a sister program created in Mates in Mining, and there's a sister program created in Mates in Energy. But we're not very good at inventing new names, so we just put another industry after. In the mining industry, we have done a pre 6-month and 18-month post design, and it has shown that stigma and issues are significantly better after 18 months as well. So it actually it tells us that somehow when people are on the program, advance into the culture. So yes, we have seen a reduction in stigma, and but that being said, I still think we've got a fair way to go.
And you've actually answered the next question, which was, are there any plans to extend this program to other trades or industries? So you've moved into mining, you've moved into energy. Any other places where people are coming forward and saying, what about us?
Yes, so there's been some interest from the rail industry. Now, the basis of the Mates Construction program is it must be industry-based. So the only way we would actually extend into our industry is when unions and employers come together and say, as an industry, this is something we want to do, and that they're prepared to take leadership of it. So in each of our industries, we actually have an industry-based committee that is in effective control of the program, and we then just provide the nuts and bolts and support into that. So in the rail industry at the moment, it's about actually getting the right people around the table to make sure that there's that industry buy-in. And a similar thing is happening in New Zealand in the construction industry, that the employer associations and unions are sort of working together to see whether they can actually find common ground around this.
So would it be fair to say that a key principle in all of this is that it has to be built from the ground up by the people who are going to be a part of it and who are going to benefit from it?
The whole idea is that it's mates for mates and it's industry for industry. Yeah.
Now, here we have another one. Do you plan to lobby government, such as education ministers, to address apprenticeship training stressors?
Absolutely. And we have to be very, very careful because we are bipartisan, and that means that we have to be politically neutral.
Yes.
So we cannot, this is obviously contested space, so we can't and we won't pick a side or an issues that are controversial, we will steer clear of, even if they need addressing. But what we have done is we have successfully achieved funding from various different sources. So in Queensland, for instance, we get funding from the Ministry of Industrial Relations as a workplace health and safety issue.
Mm-hmm.
Federally, we get funding from the Department of Health as a public health issue. And we've just been funded through the Department of Training through an industry training fund for the apprenticeship project and the blueprint project and some other projects under as what they've recognized is actually as an industry. We can train people all we like, but unless we actually retain the skills we have within the industry, we're not wise about how we spend our money.
Mm-hmm.
So they actually say doing mental health and suicide prevention is a strategy to retain good skills within the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've answered this, but the question was, what training do the advisors receive? And I think we're talking about Safe Talk, Assist. Is there any other training associated?
So we use Safe Talk and we have Assist. Our case managers are social workers, so they're obviously they're fully skilled in the area they work in.
Mm-hmm.
Our field officers are Assist trained.
Okay.
And we think that we actually back that process as being the most effective way to deal with suicidology. But most importantly, they are people who are extremely relatable within the industry. Mm-hmm. So they are men and women who have worked in the industry. So they have a background, most often a background of lived experience in terms of mental health and suicide prevention. So they can talk about this with authenticity and directness.
Mm-hmm. Well, and my sense is that's another key piece, that it's people who bring their lived experience of being touched in some way by challenges, by suicide, by mental health issues. And that provides, I think, something that is also driven by an awful lot of passion.
Yeah. I think that when it comes to program design, we really have to understand lived experience in its widest form. And we have to not just use it as a sort of a nice to have or a bit we sort of sprinkle programs with afterwards to make the magic. It actually has to be something that has to be at the very core of the design of the program.
Absolutely.
What is the lived experience of a worker who's going to use this program? What's the lived experience of a worker who's been going through a mental health crisis? What's the lived experience of a worker who's lost to suicide? And until we understand that, we shouldn't start designing programs.
Now, I want to make a point of, I know there are a number of members also of the National Collaborative for Suicide Prevention on this webinar. I'm a member of that collaborative and happy to be. And we want to thank the Mental Health Commission of Canada and particularly Carla Thorpe also for their support of this webinar today. I know they will be putting it on their website and helping us share it more broadly. I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us. It's I'm hoping it will catalyze a whole lot of thinking about how we could do things better by engaging from the bottom up. So I very much appreciate this.
Well, that's all I'm on. Love talking.
Yeah.
Thanks.